If you've ever looked at your portraits and felt like something was missing, even though everything technically looks right, you're probably dealing with the same problem a lot of photographers run into. The subject is sharp, the exposure looks good, the background is blurred, but the image still feels flat. And usually, the answer isn't buying a new camera or shooting at an even wider aperture. It's about making better decisions before we even press the shutter. So in this video, we're going to look at 5 simple changes we can make during a portrait session to create more depth, more separation, and a much more cinematic look. These are things we can control with the location, lens, colors, lighting, and even the way we direct our subject. And once we start paying attention to these things, our portraits can look completely different without needing a complicated setup. The first thing we want to look at is focal length, because the lens we choose can completely change how much depth we can create in a location. If we're shooting somewhere that's already full of layers, we have a lot to work with, but sometimes we're stuck in a location where the background is basically one flat wall of trees, flowers, or whatever happens to be behind our subject, and that's when the right focal length can make a huge difference. A longer lens like a 135mm can be really useful in this situation. Instead of seeing the background as a collection of separate objects, the compression pulls everything visually closer together and turns those distant elements into a much smoother background. At the same time, we get that beautiful separation around our subject. So if we're working in a location that feels flat, we don't necessarily have to move somewhere else. Sometimes we just need to change the way we're looking at that location. A longer focal length gives us another way to create depth when the environment isn't giving us much to begin with. The second thing is something that's incredibly easy to overlook, and that's color. We tend to think about color during editing, but we're actually making those decisions before the shoot even begins. When we arrive at a location, we should look at the overall color palette. Maybe we're surrounded by greens with some yellow flowers and warm sunlight. Maybe we're working somewhere darker with brown, gray, and muted tones. Once we understand those colors, we can choose an outfit that works with the environment instead of fighting against it. We don't necessarily want our subject to completely blend into the background, but we also don't want their outfit to look like it belongs to an entirely different photograph. A little contrast can make the subject stand out while still keeping the entire image cohesive. This is why location scouting can be so useful. If we know what the location looks like before the shoot, we can actually plan the wardrobe around it. For a bright outdoor location, lighter or pastel colors might work beautifully. For something darker and more dramatic, we might go with deeper or muted colors. We're essentially building the color palette of the final image before we even take the picture, and that can make a huge difference. The third change is to start thinking about light as a creative tool instead of simply something we need to get the exposure right. The quality and direction of light can completely change the mood of a portrait. Direct light can give us a brighter, punchier image with stronger contrast. It can make colors feel more intense and bring a lot of energy into the frame. But if we turn our subject around and put the sun behind them, everything changes. Backlighting can create that softer, glowing look that works incredibly well for portraits. We can get highlights around the hair, softer skin tones, and a much dreamier feeling overall. Neither approach is necessarily better, they're simply different tools. And this is where we can create variety throughout the same photo session. We don't have to shoot the entire session under one type of light. We can start with direct light, move into open shade, then use backlight when the sun gets lower. Even if we're working with the exact same subject and location, those changes can make the final gallery feel much more complete. The important thing is to actually look at where the light is coming from. Instead of standing somewhere and simply asking whether the subject is properly exposed, we should ask what that light is doing to the face, the background, and the overall mood of the image. That's when natural light becomes something we can control rather than something we just react to. The fourth change is to stop shooting the entire session from one perspective. Even if we have a favorite portrait lens, using the same focal length for every single image can make an entire gallery start feeling repetitive. And we don't necessarily need 5 different lenses to fix that. For example, pairing something like a 135mm with a 50mm gives us 2 completely different ways of seeing the same subject. With the 135mm, we can stay farther back and create those tighter, compressed portraits with a very soft background. It's great for headshots and close-up images, where we want the subject to completely dominate the frame. Then we can switch to something like a 50mm and step back a little. Suddenly, we're including much more of the environment. We can see the location, the surrounding colors, and the space around our subject. That gives the viewer more context and makes the image feel completely different. And if we're just starting out and only have one lens, that's totally fine. We can still create variety by changing our distance, composition, camera angle, and how much of the environment we include. But as we eventually add lenses to our kit, it's worth thinking about how each lens complements what we already have, rather than simply buying another lens that gives us the exact same look. Finally, one of the easiest ways to make portraits feel more natural is to stop making every shot about holding a perfect pose. Posing can get stale really quickly, especially when we're working with someone who isn't used to being photographed. They start thinking about their hands, their shoulders, their face, where they're looking, and whether they're standing correctly, and the more they think about all of that, the less natural they usually look. So instead of giving constant instructions, we can encourage movement. Ask them to walk, turn around, spin, move their hair, adjust their dress, take a few steps toward us, look away and then back. These simple movements give people something to do, and that alone can make them feel much more comfortable. It also gives us more opportunities to capture those little moments between poses where the expression and body language feel much more natural. And we don't have to wait until the subject is uncomfortable to do this. Even with an experienced model, movement can give us more variety and energy throughout the session. The goal isn't to make every frame look like a candid photo, it's simply to give our subject enough freedom that we're not forcing every part of their body into a specific position. At the end of the day, creating depth in a portrait isn't just about shooting at f1.2 and hoping the background disappears. Depth comes from everything working together. The focal length we choose, the distance between our subject and the background, the colors in the scene, the direction of the light, the perspective we're shooting from, and even how comfortable our subject feels can all change the final image. So if your portraits have been looking a little flat lately, don't immediately start looking for another lens or a new camera. Start by looking at the scene differently. Try a longer focal length when the background feels flat. Plan your colors before the shoot. Move your subject into better light. Switch focal lengths to give the gallery more variety. And most importantly, let your subject move and actually enjoy the process. Because when all of those little decisions start working together, that's when we get that sense of depth that makes a portrait feel much more cinematic instead of just technically correct. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments which of these changes made the biggest difference to your portraits. We'll see you in the next one.